Afternoon once again. I hope you enjoyed your afternoon session, and thank you so much for sticking with us as we have our final session today. We do know we got wind that it's a little bit chilly in here, and we need some of that liquid sunshine, but we did speak with the DoubleTree, and hopefully you'll start to feel the warmth. About 5 minutes ago, they were adjusting the temperature so that it's a little more comfortable than it was. Well, it is my true pleasure that I get to introduce our closing keynote speaker, Sue Best. Sue graduated from the University of Kansas School of Social Welfare with her bachelor and master's degree in social work. She has spent over 40 years in healthcare, specializing in oncology, palliative care, and pediatrics. In recent years, Sue has completed her studies at Seattle University's Graduate School of Theology and Ministry, and in 2016 was commissioned as a deacon for the Lutheran Church, ELCA. She currently serves at Augustana Lutheran Church as well as within the Oregon Synod of the ELCA. Sue is currently doing advanced training in the field of spiritual direction. Though Sue has lived in Portland for over 30 years, she still calls Chicago home, as most of her extended family still live in the Chicago area. Sue will always be a devoted Chicago Cubs fan, which has taught her a lot about maintaining hope in her life, if all of you know the Chicago Cubs history. I love it. Sue is a breast cancer survivor of almost 13 years, and she's been a longtime Komen volunteer for us, including many years of being on this very issues planning committee, helping us, as well as helping with Race for the Cure, Worship in Pink, and other community activities here. Sue is an avid cyclist, as well as a member of the Pink Phoenix Dragon Boat Team, Go Team, the first breast cancer survivor dragon boat team in the United States of America. I know in my heart you will absolutely enjoy Sue's presentation today as she guides us here to the closure of our 2019 Breast Cancer Issues Conference. So please do join me with a warm welcome to Sue.
Well, I would echo Andy's sentiment. You have survived the day, but what a fantastic day it's been, right? I'm always humbled to see what this conference does. And the biggest thing that I think it does is create a sense of sisterhood and brotherhood. So before I start talking, if there's someone at your table you don't know, I want you to introduce yourself to them, because we're all one group here, right? So just say hello to someone at your table. Well, thank you. It's really important that we do this together, isn't it? So breast cancer is a topic of which I feel very passionate. Having been a long-time oncology and palliative care social worker, I have had the great good fortune of spending a lot of my career with women and a few men. Are there any men here with breast cancer or breast cancer survivors? I know that they exist, so. I think at one point calculated that I probably had met 1,000 women who'd had breast cancer. And I feel like as I've traveled my life, I keep meeting more. One of the best parts of having worked in oncology is that I got to lead a breast cancer support group for 15 years at Good Samaritan Hospital. And I think we were one of the first support groups in the early 80s. It was a novel concept to talk out loud about things like cancer. So a couple highlights about this group is that every group has there's some pods of women that traveled through. And the first pod was a group of women who to this day, 30 years later, I think still get together. And they had an acronym which was BOOBS. Beautiful, outrageous, outgoing, brave survivors. I think there sometimes was a bodacious in there. And then also some years later, there was a group that was the ringleader was a woman who had a pink Harley Davidson motorcycle. And she taught all of us swear therapy. Now, I must say I've used swear therapy a lot in my life, and it's really embarrassing to say that as a deacon that's commissioned in the Lutheran Church. I had to recently tell my bishop, who's a really great guy, I said, Dave, I had to apologize to God the other day. I have been swearing too much. So I just want to say that there's times and places for that. So I want to give you an overview of what we're going to talk about today. So first is just to introduce this topic, to really look at the whole person model of care. You've heard of a lot of aspects of breast cancer today, haven't you? A lot of them have dealt with physical issues, probably most of them. So I really want to bring that all together to look at our whole person, to look at the common emotional responses to breast cancer, to talk about those really key core questions of how and why and when, to look at spirituality and religion, to look at both how they're similar but how they're distinctly different, to tell you just a little bit about my own survivorship story in the context of looking at survivorship overall. I have some recommendations of ways to kind of increase and maintain some emotional and spiritual well-being, and ways to find solace and peace in your life. I had the great good fortune early in my career as a social worker, when I was just a young pup in my 20s, to work with a true visionary, Dr. Jack Stanwood. Dr. Stanwood was the medical director for the cancer rehab teams at Good Samaritan and Emmanuel Hospital starting in 1975. And he was truly a visionary to look at the whole person model. You see, Dr. Stanwood was an old family practice doctor from Lebanon who at the age of 40 went on to do advanced training and was a rehab physician, but he was very much influenced by the hospice model. And I recall Dr. Stanwood saying, hospice makes so much sense, this looking at every part of someone's being and looking at their family, and why should someone be dying to get that kind of care? Not to say it's certainly important in the hospice time, but he said it's important for everyone. So our team had the chance to meet every person at Good Sam and Emmanuel who had a cancer diagnosis, whether it was stage 1 breast cancer or stage 4 renal cancer, just because in and of itself of having cancer is kind of a big deal, as you can all attest. So as a social worker, and the social workers in the audience can attest to, often our training focuses on what is the emotional reaction or response to life, to a crisis, to an illness, to a difficult childhood, as well as what is our social context. Who are we, where are we from? What was our environment in which we were raised? Were we raised by grandparents? Were we raised by our parents or a single parent? Were we from El Salvador? Or were we from Mississippi? So those things made a difference. But what Dr. Stanwood instilled in me is that I needed to also look at who is that whole person. The World Health Organization has a really wonderful model to look not just at illness, but health. And so they look at a whole person model for sure. First of all, physical health is very important, and they don't talk about just illness, but health. How do we maintain our health? What is the nutrition that we eat? How do we move our bodies? Do we look at our weight? How do we get taken care of? And again, how, when we're ill, what do we do? Our emotional health, it's just not responding to crisis, but how do we create a good emotional balance and composure in our life? How do we find self-esteem? How do we deal with stress? And of course, our emotional health can be affected, as you can all attest to when we have a physical health issue. What about our intellectual health? It's so important that we continue to grow our brains. Our brain is an organ that needs to be fed and watered, and so for us to live and to keep doing great things for it. And then, of course, our spiritual health. How do we create meaning in our life? What are the beliefs that we have? How do we deal in our spiritual journey with despair or disappointment, as well as with hope and joy? Our social health is that this is a beautiful example. We can't do this by ourselves, can we? We live in a world where we are interdependent. We don't live on our own. So we so need each other. Our occupational health really speaks to what do we do with our day? Whether it's a paid position, whether it was we do a wonderful job taking care of elderly parents or our kids, we do volunteer work. We couldn't get through today, could we, without all of our wonderful volunteers? And then last but not least, our environmental health. What is our obligation to deal with the environment in which we live and take care of Mother Earth? Part of what I do in my life is photography, so all these pictures are ones that I've taken. This was actually close to the Redwood Forest in Northern California. So in our lives, we maintain a sometimes very gentle or tenuous equilibrium with scores of competing demands. We have work, we have family, we have financial concerns. We may have a difficult past we're trying to deal with. So enter stage left, breast cancer. And even for those of us who have the strongest resilience or equilibrium, how could it not throw us off our pegs? So it makes complete sense that when you hear those words, how could your life ever be the same? So you can all attest to the fact that breast cancer is not something you get over or you get through, that you just move on. It's part of who you are. For some in this audience, you have just started this journey. I met a woman today who was just diagnosed a week ago. And I also met a woman who met me when I was 30 years younger and we both had less gray hair. And so there's the whole spectrum represented in this room. There are the people that love you and care about you. There's amazing providers and volunteers here. So we have people in the whole spectrum. We have women who are living every day with metastatic disease. So truly, I stand before a room full of experts. Just because I'm here doesn't mean I have the answers. I certainly have context. I've spent a lot of time talking and working with women with breast cancer and the people in their lives. I've dealt with my own breast cancer. I've worked as a social worker. I've worked in pastoral care. So what I hope today is to convey the wisdom that I have had the great fortune to gain by just listening, comforting, spending time, and also thinking of my own experience and feeling those feelings. So we each have our unique blend of beliefs, values, and that very much in palliative care, that's what we often try to uncover is we could all have the same condition, but because we innately have different beliefs and values, we all make different decisions that are a reflection of us, so that often there isn't a right or wrong answer when you're making really important decisions. So there are certainly common threads amongst all of us about the kinds of questions we have to deal with and the kinds of answers we have to come up with. But I want you to embrace who you are, what your beliefs and values are, and who you are in the world. I just need to grab a book. This is one. I'll be right back. This is a longtime colleague and friend, Hester Hill-Schnipper. Hester she just retired, a longtime social worker at Beth Israel Deaconess Hospital in Boston. And Hester's also a breast cancer survivor on 2 occasions. She's one of the most gracious, lovely women I know who is an articulate writer and speaker. And so Hester wrote a book called After Breast Cancer. Because there's a lot written, she really was touched by the fact, having spent her career working with women with breast cancer, wow, there's a lot of stuff that talks about what happens when you're going through breast cancer, but what happens after you're all done? Her husband Lowell is also a medical oncologist, and also he wrote part of the foreword to this book that I want to read you. The moment a woman hears a diagnosis of breast cancer, her world is forever different. Initially stunned to the point of numbness, she gradually finds an equilibrium that enables her to wind her way through a complex process. She is called upon to sift through an overwhelming amount of information and to make difficult decisions about treatment choices so she can arrive at the options that are best for her. While that process is all-consuming, the help of a team of surgical and medical oncologists, and I would say a bunch of other professionals, offers most women a structure of relationships that conveys a sense of security, if not well-being. However, when that chemo and radiation and immunotherapy and hormonal therapy is done, women can sometimes experience a renewed sense of vulnerability because all of a sudden you have the energy to go, holy crap, what just happened last year? And to deal with the emotional and spiritual healing that you need. So it's certainly normal to have existential anxiety. So he goes on to say, women need to understand that these feelings are completely normal. They are not unique and are usually transitional. In the aftermath of breast cancer treatment, the body begins to renew itself, but the spirit takes an undulating course. So it just speaks to that, again, this is a journey that's individual for each of us, and it takes some time and energy. So in terms of emotions, when I started my career, there weren't a lot of people talking about breast cancer, talking about what it's like to have illness. And one of the first people that wrote a book was Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Now, her book focused on end of life, but it really was she was one of the first people to come out of the closet and say, hey, folks, we need to talk about these things. Dr. Kubler-Ross was a Swiss psychiatrist, and I recall the story that she went into, I think, a Chicago hospital and said, hey, I would like to talk to your patients that are dying. And they said, oh, we don't have anyone that's dying. Just a little bit in denial, you think? But what she did is she really got us talking about it. Women were starting to talk about Betty Ford as one of our leaders, to start talking about the fact that she had breast cancer. So I love this story. I had this gentleman who was in the hospital. It used to be in the 70s and 80s. You were in the hospital a really long time, unlike today where you're lucky to be in for 24 hours. So this gentleman, Harold, was in the hospital, I don't know, for some months, and his wife read this book. She said, Sue, I'm so worried something's wrong with me. So I read Dr. Kubler-Ross's book. She first talks about that at first you're shocked, then you're in denial, then you're angry, then you're depressed, and then you accept it. She's like, I think I'm doing this wrong. I'm not an angry person. And so it taught me a lot about, you're going to hear a lot of advice about how you're supposed to react, who you're supposed to be when this happens. And it just tells me that there's a whole range of emotions. And so I assured Elaine that she really was okay, that it was okay not to be an angry person. But as you all know, we've all had crises in our life. Whether you've had breast cancer or not, you have faced loss and difficulty, and know that there is a range of emotions. So of course it's going to be normal. Every person who hears, oh, you have cancer, do you hear anything else? I know when I was told that, not sure what else I heard. So it's so normal to have shock and disbelief. And at times, horrible anxiety or sadness and anger. And yep, there are stages and phases that you go through. Sometimes it depends on where you are in your treatment. Sometimes they all come in 10 minutes. And sometimes out of nowhere. And the other reality is we had a life outside of breast cancer that didn't just magically go away. So you have other stresses, other concerns. You may have a kiddo who's just starting high school, or a parent who's ill, or a husband who just took a new job, or a partner who has MS. So there are a lot of other things in life. So it's not, and then guess what? Hormonal changes. Isn't that fun? Who had any hormonal changes in their lives? Anyone know about menopause in this room? And the joys of menopause? So I love this, and how lucky for me to find a pink roller coaster. And I think we can all relate that it's like, in the morning I'm doing great, and then 2 hours later you're like bawling. So the good news is Dr. Patricia Ganz is a fantastic physician who works at the UCLA Cancer Center and is also a rehab physician. Dr. Ganz has spent her career looking at people with cancer, and a lot of her research in breast cancer. And what she says is that the literature on the psychosocial aspects of breast cancer suggests that the vast majority of women adjust well to this diagnosis. It doesn't mean you don't have times where your chin is on the ground, that you're anxious as heck, that it's 3 a.m. and you're wondering, golly, how am I going to get through chemo? Absolutely, those things happen. And she said even studies that women who were newly diagnosed, who completed treatment, as well as women who have metastatic disease, that there is a chance to be resilient and strong. But she said what helped is certainly some of these things, our families and friends, our healthcare team, having someone who provides spiritual support, the things that you learn, meditation or reflective time, exercise, a support group. I love this picture because it says a lot. It says that we can't do this alone. My niece is a teacher outside of Chicago, and unfortunately this was the day after there had been a shooting. And so this was the kids' chance to show solidarity, where they had a moment of silence. And so even at a young age, unfortunately, our kids are learning these lessons, but they're also learning we can't do it by ourselves. So that's what Dr. Ganz really emphasizes. The reason women get through this and cope and are resilient is they have support. So in our quest to discover what this journey with breast cancer means, we come up with a plethora of questions, don't we? There's the why, how, when, what does it mean? Will I die? How do I get through this? How do I make sense of this? And there's often not that answer. 80% of us, statistically, are what are called random breast cancers who don't have a family history. I'm one of those 80%. I'm the only woman in my family. I have 7 siblings who has breast cancer. My parents didn't. But between them, they had 4 cancers, so there's some cancer influence. But how normal it is for us to ask the question, why? Søren Kierkegaard is looked upon. He was a Danish philosopher in the 1800s and was attributed for starting the kind of the philosophical belief system of existentialism. Jean-Paul Sartre is the one who kind of spoke out loud about it and said that every individual, not a society, not a religion, is solely responsible for giving meaning to their own life. It doesn't mean that we're not influenced by other people or our faith or our belief systems. What matters is to find purpose. The crucial thing is to find a truth that fits you. So undoubtedly, one of the great questions is why. And even for women who have genetic mutations, who may have Ashkenazi Jewish heritage, who are more apt to have cancer, they deserve to ask that question of why. So in some ways, it's a very scientific question, right? And if you just Google, you'll get 30,000 responses in a nanosecond. But it may never ask you why. It may never answer your question of why, but... So this is a beautiful woman in Cinque Terre, Italy, who I don't know what she was thinking about that day, but I love this picture. She also is a very anal laundry woman, because you might see it's all lined up and there's one yellow in the middle. I loved her sense of style. But I thought that her face depicted what we often all feel, which is, wow, why did this happen? And so despite having 13 years of Catholic education, having been involved in faith communities my whole entire adult life, having recently been commissioned as a deacon and done extensive studies at Seattle University School of Theology and Ministry, I can't see I have any more answer than you do. And I'm sorry if you thought I might. But what I can do is offer the guidance of, yep, we're going to ask why, but what do we need to ask next? The next question is, so what do we do? How do we do it? Who's going to help us? How do we get through this? So it's a great segue into looking at the issue of spirituality. So you might say, I'm not a religious person, Sue, so how does this relate to me? Well, we are all innately spiritual beings. And if you see in the slide, spiritus, the Latin root, who took Latin in Catholic schools? Yeah, you might recognize some of these Latin words. It means breath. It is our essence. It is our core. It is who we are. In its broadest sense, spirituality speaks to our core beliefs and values, how we create and make meaning in life, and how we explain mystery. And certainly there's a lot of mystery around breast cancer, isn't there? So there are so many amazing definitions of spirituality, and I just picked a few. Spirituality is the aspect of humanity that refers to the way individuals seek and express meaning and purpose, the way they experience the connectedness to the moment, to self, to others, to nature, and to the significant or sacred. Spirituality refers to our souls. It refers to the deep inner essence of who we are. It is the openness to the possibility that the soul within each of us is somehow related to the soul of all that is. Spirituality is what happens to us that is so memorable we cannot forget it. And yet we have a hard time finding how to, because words fail to describe it. So this is one of the most spiritual things I do, which is dragon boat. This is after practice. We had, for a little while, had to paddle on Vancouver Lake, and this is after practice one night with a beautiful sunset. So I want to spend a few moments defining religion and distinguishing religion and spirituality. And though my religious roots are from a Christian perspective, I am in awe of the whole range of religious traditions that exist and which come from very deep and intentional roots, which need to be honored and embraced. So the interesting thing about Portland, Oregon, is statistically, we have the smallest percentage of people who are part of a religious faith community in the country. Bunch of heathens, I guess. But what I say is that even if that's the case, people are deeply spiritual. And my work, particularly in palliative care, where you're really looking at what are the meaning of life, especially for people who are nearing the end of their life, those are the really core questions. I am so profoundly touched at how spiritual we all are and finding that core of us as in our humanness. So here are a few definitions of religion. And again, how it's related but different from spirituality. It's a set of beliefs and practices and language that is searching for transcendent meaning and generally based on the belief in a deity. Religion is more collective and communal with a shared belief system which binds people together. Or in this case, pelicans. Now, I could say to you that they just were enchanted by a sermon I was giving, but actually it was a fish market in a tropical area, and I just love the picture. So anyway, it's just my bit of humor. Religion says, here are special words that are meant to be passed on. Take them to heart. Here is a set of beliefs that form a coherent whole. Take them as your own. Here are people for you to revere in historical events, for you to recall. That was actually an interesting accident. So when I was doing my graduate studies, I used to do my studying and my papers at my dining room table. And I had these windows in my old house in Irvington that had a beveling around it. And the background is a painting I have, and all of a sudden, this appeared. So it was just kind of one of those aha moments. So this is one of the most amazing breast cancer heroines. This is Dr. Susan Love. How many of you know who Dr. Susan Love is and her breast book? She is an amazing woman who spent her career working for and with women with breast cancer, she's a surgeon, but also a researcher. And she was at an international breast cancer dragon boat race, and I had the great opportunity to meet her and tell her how much she'd meant to me. So my breast cancer story is the intersection of my professional life and my personal experience with breast cancer. As I mentioned, my career in social work I've spent many, many years working with women with breast cancer. And from that experience, and like anyone who's worked with people who have a life-limiting or life-threatening illness, you know that you learn a few things about that. You learn about what's important. For me, if you'll pardon the term, I hate people that are BSers. And when people are ill, they get very real. It doesn't matter if you drive a TriMet bus or you're a CEO or you're a grandmother. There's something universal about what happens when someone's faced with a serious illness. So having all those conversations, all those sacred moments, it gave me an inkling about what it might be like to have cancer. Again, I would never say, oh, I know how you feel, because that wasn't true. I had family members who'd had cancer, but I had never. So, and I had, as I mentioned, a keen interest in breast cancer. So I felt like I had taken a peek into the life of a woman with breast cancer. So in 2006, I was turning 53, and I was born in 1953, and I thought, wow, this is bound to be a really lucky year. My birthday is April 12th, and on April 4th, I got a phone call from a radiologist who'd biopsied my breast the day before to say, well, I have some news. And you all know, you hear those words, and life is never quite the same again, and you don't hear much else. So despite all the preparation and information that I already knew and could offer my family and my friends, my cancer diagnosis scared the crap out of my 7 sisters and brothers. You see, both of our parents had died in the 5 years preceding, so we'd had a lot of experience with cancer, and I was the first of the 8 of us to experience a cancer diagnosis. Though I had sat with many women as they helping them figure out, how do I decide between a lumpectomy and a mastectomy, I was no more prepared to make that decision than the man on the moon. And though I had sat literally with hundreds of women having chemotherapy, nothing quite prepared me for the nausea, the hair loss, having an infection in my portacath 3 weeks in after my treatment, neutropenia. But like many of you, I got through it. I couldn't have gotten through it by myself. And while my treatment is behind me, I've had, like many of you, chemotherapy, radiation therapy, lumpectomy, immunotherapy, and 10 years of hormonal therapy. I've developed a few pesky cardiac issues, which I still deal with to this day, but I would do this all over again. Because I figure, thanks to Dr. Jay Anderson and Dr. Joanne Nelson and my naturopath and all sorts of people, I'm here today. Just like all of you, I couldn't have done this by myself. So my conclusion is, and we think about survivorhood, is there's never really an end point. We all hope there's an end point, but how could we be the same? How could something like this, how could we have this fantasy of like, can I just be that person I was before? But you really can't. So my work in oncology and palliative care, as well as my own breast cancer experience and the experiences of having 2 parents that died of cancer, has greatly influenced the way I look at life and the way I look at survivorship. So survivorship is a term that we all define differently. Some of us define it that I'm a survivor the day I was diagnosed. Some define it I'm a survivor after I finish treatment. Some really don't care, which is fine. But we all have common ground. There's that universality of facing loss. There's our uniqueness. There's a decision-making. But we also gain some insight about priorities. We become aware of the precious nature of time and that it's important to live life with meaning. So in my breast cancer survivorship, I demand certain things of myself and ask myself questions. And I ask myself, how am I living my life? Is it with consciousness? Am I paying attention? Am I listening to my heart, to my head, to my soul? What choices am I making in my life? This year, when I don't make New Year's resolutions typically, but this year I challenged myself to be more bold in who I was. And 6 weeks ago, I quit my job at OHSU. I've been a social worker for 43 years, and I've been a deacon for 3, and I feel very called to somehow figure out what that means in my life. Doesn't mean I haven't valued my work as a social worker. And so I can tell you that I'm both excited and completely terrified, because there aren't just a bunch of deacon jobs out there in the Lutheran Church. But I feel called, and I can now be my whole self of what I bring to a person. I always look at what am I passionate about? How do I figure that out? What inspires me? And I don't put up with crap. You know, sometimes I find myself speaking up for myself more. I look at social justice and say, that's not right. So I find myself doing that better. In my path of resilience and recovery, I want to look at what are the things that I'm lagging behind on? What are the challenges I'm not facing? Am I too stubborn to ask for help? Anyone have a problem with that in this room? We're all women, we take care of the world. I was raised by Mrs. Do-Gooder, take charge. And that was not a compliment from my father to my mother. But she had 8 children and was always busy. So I would say don't be too stubborn to ask for help. So my perspective on spirituality and how I have explored it with the scores of patients and families that I've worked with is that indeed we each have, as I mentioned, our own core beliefs and values. That as someone who may offer spiritual support and guidance, the last thing I'm going to do is lay my beliefs on you, because that's not fair. Because I'm never going to tell you how you must feel or what you must believe. My approach is to always look at spirituality from a very ecumenical and broad lens, especially in Portland, Oregon, to be respectful that we all come from our own spiritual roots and beliefs. And my brand of spirituality is uniquely mine, just as yours is yours. So providing spiritual accompaniment was and continues to be really important to me, and that's why I'm going to delve into probably a couple-year training program in the field of spiritual direction. My belief is that often things happen and we don't know why. There's a great book out that says, Things Happen for a Reason and Other Lies I Love, written by, and I'm so sorry I can't think of her name right now, but it's written by someone who teaches, who is at the Duke Divinity School and who had stage 4 colon cancer. Because people have a lot of platitudes because they don't know what else to say to you. And it may make them feel better, but it doesn't necessarily make you feel better. So I would really urge you to believe what you believe is right and is right for you. So what my belief is that often things do happen that we can't explain. And my hope is that I have the strength and you have the strength and grace to deal with what's before us. What I discovered for me was the gift of support and prayer and strength. I've gotten through some very tough times, as you all have, that by leaning into my faith and my faith traditions and the communities that are part of my life, I have been able to trudge through adversity. I also have amazing sisters and brothers. We're all very different, but I knew that they each had my back, even though most of them live in Chicago. But it doesn't mean that I don't have a few moments where I say, okay, God, I don't get it. Will you please explain this? So I want to talk about some things that I think might help. To first focus on emotional issues. So embrace whatever emotions you have. And that may sound really scary, because sometimes we're afraid if we embrace them, are we going to fall apart? But just know there's a time and place. So if you're in the throes of chemotherapy, immunotherapy, radiation therapy, and you're exhausted, your job is to get through treatment. So it may be that you don't have the time and energy to deal in depth with those emotional and spiritual healing that you need, but just know it will come. And don't be surprised if some days after you're done and everyone else thinks, oh, you look fine, you should be fine, that your chin's on the ground. So that may be a time where you have a chance to pause and go, wow, this has been a tough year. I need to talk to my yoga instructor. I need to talk to my priest. I need to talk to my rabbi. I need to talk to my friend. I need to talk to a therapist. So seek information and understanding. What I find and what I've often encouraged patients and families is with information we have power. Even as we try to explain illness to small children, they're kind of like us. If we understand something, it's easier for us to cope with it. Even if the news isn't great, if we have some grasp of what we're looking at, that makes it easier. Extend yourself some grace and compassion. How many of you give yourself a hard time? Anyone here, maybe? Yeah, just a few of us. So it's really important that you just say to yourself, I'm doing the best I can. And it's not perfect, and today it sucks. Today I'm grouchy. And hopefully there's people around you that can accept that. Expect the unexpected. Isn't that true? I mean, it's kind of true in life in general, but it's particularly true when you think you're having chemo next week and you're neutropenic and you can't have, and you are going to be done next week. So just trying to go with the flow. Don't do this alone. Obviously, I'm amazed that you're all still here at the end of the day, frankly. But don't do this alone. We can't do this alone. Seek emotional support from people who can really hear you. You know, you have those friends that say, hey, Mary, how are you? Great, and move on. I want to have friends that say, hey, Sue, how are you really doing? And who can hear the answer. And you know who those people are in your life, because sometimes you need to just say, I'm really struggling. I'm having a really tough time. So know who those people are, because they kind of show themselves to you. And remember, you're not crazy. So there's times that I think we all feel like we're a bit crazy. There's some days I walk out of my therapist's office and go, I'm not crazy. She said I'm okay. She said I'm normal. And just know you feel so flippin' crazy, but you're not. You're just having that emotional roller coaster. And seek social support and find your community. Whether it's someone cute like this. That's Lily. And unfortunately, Lily went to doggy heaven last month. She was 13 years old, and she just looks like a badass. Like, you want this ball, sister? She was deaf and white, and as a white boxer, but she came into my life about a year after my diagnosis and changed my life forever. And this is something. Can the Pink Phoenix members please rise that are in the audience, or wave your hand back there? I see you back there. Yep. So Pink Phoenix, if some of you don't know, we are the first breast cancer dragon boat team in the country, 1997. And it takes us to really cool places. This summer we got to go to Florence, Italy. So every 4 years there's an international regatta somewhere in the world, and darn it was in Florence. Such a hard place to go. So it's now been in all the regions. It's been in Australia, it's been in Canada, it's been in Sarasota in 2014, and this past year. And so we had 2 very strong squads. There were 128 teams from 17 countries. It was the largest women's sporting event in the world. 4,000 women strong. All breast cancer survivors. And so of the 128 teams, one of our teams came in the 40s, 40-something, and one of our squads came in 6th. It was amazing. I mean, just to be with 4,000 women with breast cancer, it was really crazy. So this just shows different events. So the top left, that was in Tacoma last year. The middle, so those of you who are survivors, the Rose Festival, we have this great friendly race called the Gorman Cup that everyone who's had breast cancer is invited to join us. We might need 100 boats, but it's a way for you to experience this amazing sisterhood. So that one in the middle shows us on one of those Rose Festival boats. This is, what you may not see is there's special socks on that say badass. So there was a Portland race that shopping is a really good thing. There's a lot of good shopping. There's jewelry, there's socks. So there was a race and we had 2 teams, and so one of the teams was kind of the B team, and we all bought badass socks and we smoked the A team twice. And so, because we just had fun. And then the bottom right corner is 2 of our amazing coaches and a teammate and I in the front, and then our 2 coaches, Anita and Alice, who are amazing women who. And then I love that this was up in Montana. Dragon boats are for real, inquire within. So looking more at some of the spiritual side of life. So seeking spiritual support, and again, I've spoken about how that's so unique for each of us, of who we are and what we are. Finding time to be still. Before I got up here, I went for a very slow walk. Now, if any of you have spoken before, you get just a few butterflies. So I just walked very slowly around the block with my headphones on. Sometimes being still is scary because it may be that all of the emotions of what you've been through may come up, which can be scary, right? But it's really important to not squash those and to ignore them, because any loss that you've had, if you don't have a chance to deal with those emotions, it keeps following you to the next loss. So make sure that you have help with that. Make sure you have someone accompanying you with that. Remember your essence. And half a sec. Oh, there we are. Acknowledge your strengths. You are all strong. You wouldn't be here today. You may feel like a wimp some days, but boy, you have so much strength, which I imagine you didn't realize how much strength you had. Discover you're a different person. We can't be the same, right? We've had this amazing thing happen in our lives, which isn't always so amazing, but how could it not shape us? Remember your essence. People don't love you just because of the color of your hair or the size of your breasts. And I don't want to diminish how important those things are, because I looked pretty bad without hair and was pretty gray, and those things are part of who we are, but your essence is who you are as a person. People love you. Yeah, people love you because of the kindness from your heart about how you help everyone else, how you're the best mom or grandma in the world, how your sisters or brothers or friends or colleagues love you. Your core doesn't go away. Discover the gifts of breast cancer. That may be hard to say if you're in the throes of treatment, but discover what's really important. Find the gratitude. It may be hard to find some days. The days that my butt was on the couch and I could barely move, I was having a hard time finding gratitude, but embrace what you're learning, maybe more than you ever thought you would. And then looking at your spiritual practices, this is one of the most amazing places in Portland, Oregon. This is from the Japanese garden. And if you've not been there, it is exquisite. It will help you be still. And I love this picture because it just shows a path. We don't know always what our path is moving forward. And part of that is being thoughtful. There's a whole area called spiritual discernment, and I actually took a class in grad school. I think I could take this class every quarter of my life, because it's really, how do you make meaningful decisions in your life? It's about being open and having awareness of who you are called to be and what you are called to do with your life. And then last but not least, you need to be bold, sister. So, part of dragon boat racing is some knucklehead gets up on top of the dragon's head, lies down, strap yourself in while the boat's going like this, and you pull a flag. Now, the fact I'm a little bit tall, so at first I used some of that swear therapy because I couldn't believe what I was doing. But it is a blast. This was a month after finishing chemotherapy. I had never surfed. I was in Hawaii. There had been an earthquake the day before, which I thought, this is kind of symbolic. Is my life going to be over? A 7-point earthquake hit the accompanying island. And I'd never surfed, and I was on the biggest surfboard that was ever made. But I got up, and it was truly, probably still is the most fun day of my entire life, where I just felt one with the water. And I thought, wow, I did this. I thought, okay, you've just been through chemotherapy. Get your ass on the surfboard. So, pardon my swear therapy. And then, as Andy said, I love to cycle. So that's just last year on the waterfront. So move your body. So this is the motto of the Pancreatic Cancer Network. And if any of you know anything about pancreatic cancer, it's a much different disease than breast cancer. It's typically fatal. And it's a disease that has very much touched my life. My mom died of pancreatic cancer. She was diagnosed and died 4 months later. And one of our closest friends from Pink Phoenix, who had breast cancer 30 years ago, now has pancreatic cancer and is nearing the end of her life. But what I like about this is that waging hope. So I could do a whole talk on hope, and we could spend a day talking about hope. And hope, I've learned, isn't just I'm hoping for a cure. It's I'm hoping for something meaningful. And none of us can tell us what to hope for, who to hope for. So don't let anyone ever tell you that you can't have hope. Because there's always something we can hope for. Maybe it's you have comfort tonight. Maybe you have a fantastic visit with your grandchild tomorrow. Maybe you get to see your daughter graduate in May. So keep those hopes going. So this teammate of ours, that's Carol. Sorry. One of my closest friends, and I've had the great gift of spending some very sacred time with her. She's currently at Hopewell House, which is an inpatient hospice. She is still sassy. She's still sticking her tongue out at me. Her essence is present and has very meaningful days. She was diagnosed 1.5 years ago with pancreatic cancer, and she paddled all last year. She was bummed because she didn't get to Italy, but she went to Wallowa Lake and was in a race in Wallowa Lake. So this was the last practice last year on Halloween, and there she is. She's pretty amazing. So she's taught me a lot about how to live a meaningful life and that you can do it till your last breath. So for those of you that may be struggling with metastatic disease, my heart is with you. And I just want to say that every day is important and every day can be meaningful. Carol is kind of the essence of one of my favorite. I'm not someone who knows scripture and verse, but Ecclesiastes, you all, even if you are not a religious person, know the song, Turn, 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 that there is a time for every season. And she emulates this one verse, which the juxtaposition of that you can both weep and laugh, and you can both mourn and dance. So Carol's mourning and dancing all at once. So it's a literal and figurative dance of holding space for what may seem like competing emotions, but is sacred space. So one of my favorite, many of you have probably seen this, Marianne Rodmacher is this beautiful poet and writer and artist. And I try to live, I have this hanging in my bedroom, live with intention, walk to the edge, listen hard, practice wellness, play with abandon, laugh, choose with no regret, continue to learn, appreciate your friends, do what you love, live as if this is all there is, live with intention. And for my wish for each of you is that you seek and find a peaceful heart, and that you continue to find ways to continually nourish your heart and soul. Thank you.
If anybody has any questions, at this point you know the drill. You can put them up, and we've got our folks in green. We'll grab them from you, and then we'll do that quickly, and then Andrew will close us out.
You're welcome. And I'm really open if you just want to stand up. I know it's a common rule. I've been on that issues committee for years.
As long as you repeat it, I'm good.
Yes, and if we can hear you, if you just want to stand up, you're welcome to. And if there's no questions, I completely understand. Oh, thank you, Tamika. I paid her to say that. And if you haven't met Tamika, you need to. She will make your day. What do you do when you have despair? You find people that can hold your hope. I have a wonderful, longtime colleague and friend of over 35 years that many of you know, Susan Headland, who's a social worker at OHSU. And Susan taught me this thing of have someone else hold your hope for a while. If you are feeling despair, do things that lift your soul, whether that is meditation, whether that's prayer, whether that's yoga. Be with people who can lift your spirit. Get a group of women together over coffee. Go to the Japanese garden. Do things that fill your soul. All right, thank you.
Sue is the only badass I know on a surfboard who can share such grace with others. And please share your warmth with Sue once again. Thank you, Sue.